His teacher had never picked him before. Not once. Until the day she chose to embarrass him in front of everyone. But when he started playing, the look on her face said everything. She didn't see it coming. Elijah Rivers sat by the window, gently tapping his pencil on his notebook. It wasn't because he was nervous. It was just a habit, one his mom always told him to stop, but it helped him focus. The classroom at Jefferson Middle School in Little Rock, Arkansas, buzzed with the usual chatter before the lesson began. Elijah, though, stayed focused on a worksheet in front of him. He liked finishing things early. At the front of class, Miss Abigail Thornton flipped through her notes. She'd been teaching 6th grade for almost 15 years. Over time, she built a reputation, strict but fair. At least, that's what the students she liked would say. Elijah wasn't one of them. She didn't make it obvious. She never yelled or said anything rude, but she almost never called on him, even when his hand was up. If he answered correctly, she moved on quickly. If he got something wrong, which was rare, she stayed on it longer, as if she enjoyed the moment. Elijah noticed it. A few other kids did too. "Yo, she barely looks at you," whispered Tyler Whitman, the boy sitting beside him. "You got, like, teacher invisibility or something." Elijah just shrugged. "Guess I do." But today felt different. Miss Thornton kept glancing at him more than usual. Not like she was angry, more like she was waiting for something. Class started. The topic was history, something about the Civil War. Elijah listened closely, taking notes, expecting the usual routine. Then it changed. "Elijah?" Miss Thornton called out, her voice sharp. "Why don't you take this one?" Heads turned. Elijah blinked. She never called on him. He sat up straighter and looked at the board. General Sherman's March to the Sea was a military campaign meant to destroy the Confederacy supplies and spirit. She said. "Not bad." It was a perfect answer, right out of the textbook. Some students exchanged glances. Tyler gave him a look like, "What just happened?" The lesson continued, but something had shifted. She wasn't ignoring him anymore. She was watching him. And then, right before the bell rang, she made her move. "Elijah," she said as students started packing up, "stay behind for a moment." A few kids glanced back, but no one said anything. Elijah slowly packed his notebook and walked to her desk. "I overheard you talking the other day," she said, folded her hands. "About your grandfather." Elijah's eyebrows lowered. "What about him?" "You said he was a musician." Her voice had a strange tone, like something heavy was hanging in the air. He nodded. "Yeah, he played jazz piano." Her lips curved, not quite a smirk, but close. "Interesting." She leaned back in her chair and tapped her fingers on the desk. "You must have picked up a few things." Elijah didn't answer right away. Something felt off. "A little," he said quietly. Her smile grew, but it wasn't friendly. "Good to know." The bell rang. Elijah grabbed his bag and headed to the door, but her voice stopped him. "Tomorrow, let's see what you've got." He turned around. "What?" She pointed to the old piano sitting in the back of the room, dusty and unused. "You'll play something for class." Elijah stared at her. A few kids still standing near the door froze, watching. "Why?" he asked. Miss Thornton tilted her head, like his question amused her. "Why not? You said your grandfather played. I'm sure you got some of that talent too." Elijah recognized the tone. It wasn't interest. It wasn't support. It was a setup, but he wasn't about to walk away. That night, Elijah barely slept. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying everything she said. This wasn't a suggestion. It was a challenge, and he knew exactly what kind. She wanted him to mess up, to prove whatever idea she already had about him. But she didn't know everything. The next morning, Elijah walked into class carrying something heavy, something unspoken. Word had already spread. Whispers followed him to his seat. "You gonna play today?" Brandon Hall, one of the louder kids, called out with a smirk. Elijah didn't respond. "Didn't know you played piano," Tyler said beside him. Elijah kept his eyes on his notebook. "There's a lot people don't know." Then Miss Thornton walked in, set her books down, and smiled like she was already in control. She hardly noticed the students as they settled into their seats. Her attention kept drifting to Elijah before she even started the lesson. The first half of class moved slowly, but Elijah barely heard any of it. His mind kept jumping ahead to the moment she called on him. And then she did. Well, Miss Thornton said, closing her book and glancing at the clock. We have a little time before we move on. Perfect. She turned toward the old upright piano, sitting in the corner. Elijah, let's see what you can do. The mood in the room shifted. Students shuffled in their seats. Some whispered, others stared. Elijah didn't move right away. He felt every eye watching him. His heart wasn't racing, but he could feel it, steady and strong. Then he stood. Soft laughs echoed across the room as he walked toward the piano. Someone said something under their breath, but he didn't catch it and didn't need to. He already knew the tone. Miss Thornton clasped her hands. Play whatever you want, she said. Elijah looked at the piano. It was clearly old. The keys had yellowed with time, and some were chipped along the edges. He gently ran his fingers across them. The piano was out of tune, not badly, but enough. He took a breath, sat down, and placed his hands on the keys. He knew exactly what he was going to play. Then came a sound, a laugh, short and quiet, from behind him. Someone snickered. But now, this wasn't just about proving Miss Thornton wrong. It was about proving everyone wrong. And he was going to do it in a way they'd never forget. The classroom was quieter than it had ever been. Even Miss Thornton, who usually looked so sure of herself, now had a curious look in her eyes. The students leaned in. Some expected a disaster. Others just wanted a show. Elijah placed his fingers on the keys. They felt familiar, even though this piano was nothing like the one at home. His grandfather's piano had been warm, full of life, with rich tones that filled every room. This one felt stiff. Its soundboard probably warped from years of being ignored. Still, he took a deep breath. A moment of silence. Then he began. The first notes floated gently through the air. A smooth blues rhythm, the kind his grandfather used to play on hot summer days in Arkansas. Elijah's hands moved with ease. His left kept time, steady and strong. His right hand flowed over the melody, confident and clear. The class grew still. The whispers stopped. Even the kids who had laughed now sat completely quiet. Miss Thornton crossed her arms. Her eyebrows drew together slightly. She had expected a slow, awkward start. But this was something else. Elijah didn't look up to check their faces. He wasn't playing for them anymore. He was playing for himself, for his grandfather. He let the music pull him in, each note like a piece of story only he could tell. His fingers moved smoothly, balancing control with deep emotion. It wasn't just skill. It was like a conversation, him and the keys. Then he took a risk. He shifted into something harder. His fingers raced up and down the keyboard, playing a run his grandfather had taught him long ago, one that took months to master. A deep, rolling bass line carried a soaring melody. Notes collided, then blended perfectly together. As he played, the silence in the room thickened. It wrapped around everyone like the sound itself. No one was laughing now. Tyler leaned forward, eyes wide. Brandon, the one who had joked earlier, sat with arms crossed, no smirk in sight. A few students looked at each other, their faces showing more than just surprise, something close to respect. Then came the high point. Elijah's fingers hit the keys with power and control. The chords echoed through the room. The music grew stronger, louder, filling every quiet corner where doubt once lived. He didn't hold back. The final run was everything he'd been holding in. And then, silence. The last note lingered in the air for a moment before fading away. Elijah slowly lifted his hands and let them rest in his lap. No one moved. No one spoke. Then came a single clap from the back of the room. Then another and another. Within seconds, the whole class was clapping. Tyler let out a low whistle. Damn. Brandon, still sitting with his arms folded, gave a small shake of his head. I didn't know he could do that. Elijah exhaled, his chest rising and falling. His heart wasn't racing from fear, but from the energy of everything he'd just poured out. He hadn't just played. He had shifted something in the room. The clapping grew louder. Students looked at each other like they'd just seen something rare, something powerful, something they'd remember. But the loudest silence came from Miss Thornton. She hadn't clapped. She hadn't moved. Her arms were still folded, her lips tight. Her expression was blank. Elijah stayed seated at the piano, hands still in his lap. He didn't grin. He wasn't looking for approval. He just let the moment breathe. Let them all sit with it. Finally, Miss Thornton spoke. "Well," she said, her voice sharp, "that was unexpected." The clapping slowed and faded. A few students looked from her to Elijah, still buzzing from what they'd just heard. Some whispered quietly. But the mood in the room had shifted. This wasn't just about music anymore. Miss Thornton tilted her head. "Where did you learn to play like that?" Elijah looked her straight in the eye. "My grandfather." Something flickered in her face. Quick, unreadable. She straightened. "I see." She paused, tapping her fingers on the desk. The only sound in the room now. Then she turned to the rest of the class. Her voice brisk. "All right, let's return to our lesson." But no one moved. Elijah glanced around. Tyler was still staring at him, wide-eyed. In the back, Madison Green looked almost irritated, like something special had just been cut short. Brandon scoffed softly. "That's it." Miss Thornton's head snapped toward him. "Excuse me." Brandon shifted in his seat and shrugged. "I mean, that's all you're going to say? He just played like something you'd hear on TV, and you're just going to pretend it didn't happen?" A few students nodded in agreement. Miss Thornton's mouth tightened. "This is a classroom, not a talent show," she said. Elijah took a steady breath. "You didn't think I could play, did you?" Her gaze snapped back to him, sharp. He didn't look away. "That's why you asked me to perform." The room stirred. Quiet whispers rippled across the desks. Miss Thornton took a slow breath. "I simply gave you a chance to share your skills with class." Elijah shook his head. "No, you didn't." His voice stayed calm. "You thought I'd mess up. That's why you picked me." More whispers, more shifting in chairs. Miss Thornton's fingers curled slightly against the edge of her desk. "That's enough, Elijah." But he wasn't finished. "You wouldn't have asked Tyler," he said, glancing at his friend, "or Madison, or Brandon. But you asked me. Why?" Now the entire room was still. Miss Thornton's jaw tightened. "You're out of line." "I don't think I am." Her eyes narrowed. Her shoulders stiffened. "Sit down," she said, her voice low. For the first time all year, Elijah didn't follow her command right away. He looked around the classroom, at the kids who had once ignored him, at the ones who assumed he had nothing to offer, the ones who smirked when she said his name. Then, finally, he stood. The silence was heavier now, charged with something unspoken. And Miss Thornton, for all her control, looked just a little less sure of herself. Because for once, she wasn't the one holding the room. Elijah walked slowly back to his seat, feeling every step as it landed. His heart wasn't pounding anymore. He wasn't afraid. In fact, he felt calm. Clear. He sat down quietly. And even as the whispers returned, the eyes followed him. He remained still, more seen than ever before. Tyler gave Elijah a slow nod, one that didn't need words. Madison, still watching Miss Thornton, sat with her arms crossed like she was waiting for something else to happen. But Miss Thornton had already turned away. She opened her lesson planner, her eyes glued to the page, pretending nothing unusual had just happened. "Let's move on," she said. But the classroom didn't return to normal. Not right away. That moment still hung in the air. Students were still whispering. Because now, it wasn't just about the music anymore. Brandon leaned back in his seat, arms folded. Kinda weird how you don't want to talk about it. Miss Thornton's head snapped up. "Excuse me?" Brandon shrugged. "You made a big deal about him playing. Now you're acting like it didn't happen." A few murmurs of agreement passed through the room. Miss Thornton's fingers gripped her book tighter. "That's enough." But Elijah had seen it, the hesitation, the unease, and so had everyone else. For the rest of the class, Her usual authority felt thinner, like glass that had just cracked. She still led the lesson. She still stood at the front. But the energy was different. The students weren't following her like they usually did. And when the bell rang, chairs scraped and backpacks zipped as students packed up, still murmuring as they left. Elijah swung his bag over his shoulder and headed for the door. But just before he stepped out, he heard her voice. "Elijah." He turned. For a second, it looked like she might say something real, something honest. But then her face tightened. "I hope you remember this is still my classroom." Elijah looked at her for a beat. Then, in the same calm voice he'd used before, he said, "I know." They stared at each other in silence for a moment. Then he turned and walked into the hallway. Tyler caught up with him. "Bro, what was that?" he said, grinning. You flipped the whole room." Elijah let out a slow breath. "Yeah." Tyler bumped his shoulder. "You gonna play again?" Elijah thought about it. The feel of the keys under his fingers, the way the music filled the room. He smiled. "Yeah, I think I will." Because today he hadn't just played a song. He had finally been heard. That afternoon, Elijah walked home with a lightness in his step. The sun hung low over West Markham Street, casting long shadows on the pavement as he made his way down familiar sidewalks. The weight he'd been carrying, the tension, the doubt, it was gone now. He stopped at the corner store to grab a bottle of water. Mr. Henson, the older man behind the counter, looked at him with a raised eyebrow. "You look like someone who just did something important." Elijah paused and smiled. "Maybe I did." When he got home, the smell of fried catfish and cornbread filled the air. His mother stood at the stove, humming to herself as she flipped a fillet. "You're home late," she said over her shoulder. Elijah dropped his bag by the door and sat at the kitchen table. Long day. Good or bad? He thought about it. The silence in the room, the way Miss Thornton had looked at him, the way his classmates had seen him differently. "Good," he said. "Really good." She turned off the burner and wiped her hands with a towel before sitting across from him. "You want to talk about it?" Elijah nodded, and for the next 15 minutes, he told her everything. She didn't interrupt, didn't rush him, just listened. Her face shifted, sometimes concerned, sometimes proud, and once just a little sad. When he finished, she let out a long breath. "Sounds like you made her uncomfortable." "I think I did." She looked at him closely. "And how do you feel about that?" He didn't have to think long, like it needed to happen. She reached across the table and squeezed his hand, smiling. "Good." The next day, school wasn't completely different, but it wasn't the same either. Miss Thornton still taught like she always did, still called on the same kids, still acted like nothing had changed. But something had. The energy in the classroom was different. People saw her differently now, and they saw Elijah differently too. At lunch, students who had never said a word to him before came over to his table. "Dude, you were insane on that piano," Madison said, sitting across from him. "How long have you been playing?" "Since I was 5. Tyler shook his head. "Man, you've been holding out on us." Elijah smirked. "Guess so." Across the cafeteria, Miss Thornton passed by with her lunch tray. Her eyes met Elijah's for a second, but this time, it was her who looked away first. And Elijah, he just kept eating. He had already said everything that needed to be said. Because some lessons aren't in textbooks. Some moments change how people see the world, whether they admit it or not. Miss Thornton had spent the whole year looking past Elijah, and in just a few minutes, he made sure she never would again. Maybe she'd never say it out loud. Maybe she'd never admit what she'd assumed. But it didn't matter, because Elijah had learned something she hadn't. When people try to silence you, when they doubt you or look through you, the best response isn't anger. It's your gift, your voice, your talent. Let it speak louder than their doubt. And when you do, they'll have no choice but to hear you.